We'd like to move on to the next session now, and I have the pleasure at this point to introduce our next speaker before we move to our final panel, and that's Jonah Schein, MPP for Davenport and from the NDP party. Jonah is his critic portfolios are for environment, GTA issues, and Jonah has devoted almost all of his life to public service. He has an MA from York, and then he worked for years in Davenport across Toronto as a teacher, as a social worker, and as a community organizer. And he's been very widely recognized for his innovative approaches to community building and public policy. Thanks to his work, especially his founding role in developing the civic engagement program at the Stop Community Food Centre, we're providing our lunch today, by the way, Jonah has helped thousands of people access services, gain new skills, and strengthen their communities. And he's looking forward to working with thousands more in his role as an MPP. Jonah was born and raised in Toronto in the West End, and he has worked very hard for the Davenport West community. He was elected MPP for Davenport on October 11th, and I welcome him to the stage.
Caught you at around 3 o'clock, which is dating time for folks sometimes. People okay? I'm really happy to be here. I'm really honored and thrilled to be at Queen's Park representing my community. I went there, well, I was lucky to get there because of the issues that we face in my part of Toronto, where I live, which are exactly these issues. And so while I'm thrilled to be there to be able to fight on those issues at Queen's Park, actually I'm really disappointed I couldn't be here all day to be with you folks rather than a question period this morning. Because I think this is the really important discussion that we have to have. So I want to thank United Way, and thank McMaster University for releasing this important report and for hosting this conversation. And I hope and expect that it's just the beginning of a conversation. The numbers to me are absolutely shocking on the one hand. The report shows an unacceptably high incidence of precarious work and the toll that it takes on individuals and on families. But it also reflects an absolute reality. It's something that we feel, I think, intuitively when you're just living in this city and living in this province. And it's something I've seen acutely when I have done work in the city, food banks, obviously, and in homeless shelters. But it's also something that you hear constantly when you start to talk to people, when you knock on doors, which is something you got to do to win elections. And that we actually continue to do post-election, to check in with people and say, what's going on? How are you doing? It's a reality for youth, it's a reality for families, it's a reality for seniors. Life is becoming more uncertain, it's becoming more expensive, it's becoming more stressful, it's becoming more precarious. And it's getting worse, unfortunately. In the last 10 years, we've seen cuts to social assistance programs in Ontario. We've seen a continued lack of childcare spaces and funding. We see a lack of good jobs with benefits. We see families struggling to raise their kids and to support their parents who are aging. We see pensioners living in poverty. I don't think I understood the kind of seniors poverty that we have in this city until I started going to doors. Because it's not always, poverty doesn't look the same when you work in social services, depending on where you work. But there are way too many seniors who are struggling living in poverty. We've seen rents increasing. We've seen unmanageable household debt. We see students who are struggling with very high tuition, the highest tuition rates in Canada, here in Ontario. And we see youth unemployment rates around 20% right now. I think it's useful. I think the report's tremendously useful and important. I think for myself, before I was elected, working on these issues, trying to address the inequality in this province, the poverty in this province, I think it's often frustrating to see things getting worse. Those of us who work as social justice activists and advocates, it's easy to think that our voices don't matter. That's absolutely wrong. It's so critical. Civil society, social movements are what are going to create change in this province, and they're what politicians need to do the right thing. When I go out to communities across Ontario, and I'm the environment critic for the NDP, talk about the environmental injustices that people see, and I'll say, well, what are you doing to push back about this? And they say, well, what are you doing? I say, well, I need to hear the fire from you. I need to hear this clearly from you. And they say, well, and I said, this is how things have always changed. And so this report has to continue to motivate people and push people to push for the right things. I think the language around precariousness is really important and interesting too. My experience, from a language perspective, are a couple of things. And both from my experience working, with low-income communities and just talking to, whoever answers the door. People in Ontario, in my experience, people in my riding, identify as middle class. And they don't identify as poor, even if they're eating at a lunch program sometimes, in an emergency food program. But if you ask people, is life really expensive? Is it unaffordable? Are you worried? Does your life feel precarious? Their heads nod. It's true. And everybody, many people identify that. I think it's an important part of the report that shows that experience of precariousness moves from low-income people who are somehow surviving on incredibly low incomes, but also on people who have maybe a decent income 1 month or 1 year, but don't know what life is going to be like in the near future. So I think this language of precariousness is important to broaden the conversation because, in my experience, many people don't think that they'll end up on welfare, or that they'll be injured at work, or that they'll have a disability. And so maybe sometimes those issues don't matter, or that they're going to be working minimum wage. But I think, bringing everybody into this conversation, people understand precariousness. I had a youth engagement meeting in my riding yesterday afternoon. Kids get this, 17-year-olds get this, 21-year-olds get this, and they're talking about poverty in their schools. They're talking about the fact that they can't afford to go to their own prom, that kids don't have access to do these things. They're talking about working in high school to pay for metro passes that they can't afford, and the unaffordability of transit in the city. I'm sorry I missed the premiere. I think congratulations to Ms. Wynne, and I'm looking forward to working with her. I understand from folks who were here that she announced that she's very willing to work with the NDP, and obviously we're in a minority government situation. I think we saw some good indications in the throne speech that she's listening to some of the proposals that we're making and that Andrea Horvath is making, who, by the way, I'm bringing greetings from. This is the kind of thing that my colleagues actually all wish they could have been at today. So many folks were like, you're going, I want to get out of the house. I was lucky. I got taken off of house duty and I'm coming here. So lots of folks would like to be here, including Andrea. In terms of this minority government situation, I hope it's quite clear that we're absolutely willing to work with anybody who wants to bring forth a social justice agenda. And those indications from the Premier are hopeful, and we're looking forward to that. But I'd say the time for action is overdue. I'm concerned that we can get drawn into a logic of inevitability on this issue, right? That there's people start to think that there's nothing we can do about this, nothing we can do to combat this. This is just the inevitable effects of globalization and the new economy. And I think this report is hopeful in opening up that conversation and saying it's not inevitable. There are solutions. There's things that we can do. There's absolutely a role for you as civil society, as labor, social justice advocates, but there's also a role for political leadership and a role for government to make life more secure for people. It's our role, it's our job to tackle precarious work, to tackle poverty together. We've taken some steps with the NDP at Queen's Park over the last year and a half, and before that as well. And I'd like to share some of those things that we've been asking for, working towards at Queen's Park. So we've advocated for a government role in encouraging job creation in the province. Government does have a role to play in this. Austerities are not working around the globe, and we can get people back to work. A critical part about this is the right to organize and form a union. And there's work that the governments can do to help people to do that work and not make it harder for folks to join unions. It's crystal clear that government has a role to play in enforcing employment standards in Ontario. We've heard about minimum wage here, right? That's something that NDP, the Chair de Novo, championed for years, something that's always in our platform, something that's a priority is to increase the minimum wage. It wouldn't cost $1, but it would immediately put money into people's pockets and make life a bit easier. I think the other parts around this, though, are about greater income supports and about greater access to public services that stabilize people's lives and make life a bit easier too. And those are things that we have been pushing for. Additionally, one of the key negotiation items that we put into the budget was about clawbacks for people on social assistance as a first step, so that people are able to keep a bit more money when they go to work, when they're on social assistance. And it looks like we're going to get support from all parties to do that. But there's way more work that needs to be done, that can be done, that should be done to address social assistance reform. And we're going to push the government to do the right thing when it comes to that. So I want to talk a little bit about workers' rights to organize, to form a union. It's obvious that if you track the increase in precarious work, it correlates with the decrease in unionization. And that there are increasing attacks on organized labor in this province and around the country. Bill 115, as we all know, was absolutely undemocratic. It was also provocative, and the result has increased people's precariousness in their own lives, for families in my riding who have no after-school support for their kids. But it's also made the role of, it's made it that much more difficult, I think, for labor in this province. It's been extremely provocative. It's created a toxic environment for public sector workers, for labor organizations, and it's further polarized this conversation, and it's the wrong conversation. It's about the jealousy of people who have a bit of security rather than trying to support people who are lacking that security. Anyway, in terms of Bill 115, clearly, obviously, the NDP did not support that legislation. And obviously, again, we think that workers have the right to organize and to bargain freely, and that we need to get people access to better, more secure work. That's something that government has a role to play in. Additionally, in terms of rights to organize, my colleague Taras Navashak introduced some legislation before the legislature was closed, and it was around card-based certification that would make it far easier for people to join a union. This is something that needs to happen. It happens in the construction industry right now, and something that we're committed to continuing to push on, and something that hopefully the new Premier will agree with. Additionally, successor rights for when companies are taken over. Thanks for asking that, my experience in Davenport in our riding is that workers are precarious, including undocumented workers who are working in construction, but also servers and people working in restaurants and actors and musicians and artists, and we have all of those folks living right in our neighborhoods. We introduced a private members bill by Michael Prue, trying to protect workers who work in bar and restaurants to actually keep their tips, because too many managers are taking that money from their employees. And I know that my colleague Peter Tabbins is also doing some work with actors to make sure that they're actually getting the support in their workplace as well. So all these proposals will protect and secure the rights of workers to organize and make a decent living. Thank you. My friends from the Workers' Action Centre have pointed this out already, which is that 1 in 3 workers have reported unpaid wages paid in their workplace in the last 5 years. It's absolutely unacceptable. It's disgusting. And it's something that can be stopped with proper labor enforcement. We have pushed as a social justice movement to try to get proper labor enforcement in Ontario, and we had a promise to do that. But unfortunately, there is still no labor enforcement in Ontario. Most employers will never see a labor employment officer, and that has to change. I'm going to skip down for a second, but I feel like I'm losing time here. But just quickly, 1 more minute. Okay. There's a host of things when it comes to reclassifying workers in terms of the growing immigration the sector, in terms of supporting migrant workers in this province, making sure that we're enforcing labor standards there and bringing in some labor standards. There's a lot of work to be done. I think when it comes to all these things, we talked about this earlier today, when it comes to minimum wage, we need to increase it, but we need to index it too. We continue to fall behind when it comes to childcare, when it comes to minimum wage, when it comes to social assistance. There's so far we have to get to, but if we don't index these benefits, we continue to fall behind. I think it's distressing that we're spending so much time, that people lose their confidence in government when we squander $1 billion on gas cancellations that are clearly political or on orange. But the bigger tragedy when you sit there and think about it is how many social services that could provide. And when you think about the lost revenue that we've experienced in the last 15 years when it comes to corporate tax cuts and the degree of social programs and childcare that this could provide. Social housing is part of this. We put forward in our last platform, I think that Mr. Stapleton was saying about a housing benefit. That's part of our proposal. We've talked about inclusionary zoning for housing that wouldn't cost the government anything, but would actually create more affordable housing in places like Toronto. And we need to move forward with this. And we have an opportunity now in a minority government situation with a mobilized public to push on these issues. Just quickly, when it comes to social assistance, we have a rare opportunity now. It's been 20 years. This government's been here for 10 years. We're seeing indications, hopefully, that they're actually going to put this on the radar and talk about this. I'm, extremely nervous and extremely hopeful that we can get some action on this. And so I encourage you to help push to make this happen and to make sure that people aren't stuck on social assistance and then forced into precarious work because they have no other choice. I will wrap up. I've got that. Stage time. But again, I really appreciate that this report is here, that people are here in support of this. It's so critical that you go back into your communities, that you talk to people, and that you start to organize, continue to organize and push. We have an opportunity in this government situation right now. You have that. Tim Good has to walk away from the table if he doesn't want to be part of this. And we're absolutely committed to our core values when it comes to the NDP in Ontario, which have to do with building a more just and more fair society. And look forward to doing it with all of you. Thank you very much.